Alrighty, so we are still in chapter 9 of the book of Luke. Um, Ashley did a great job yesterday going over um, Jesus sending out the 12 to their missionary journeys. So I want to just kind of recap. Like, remember that Jesus is in his public ministry. He's going around like from town to town, and he had just chosen the 12, like not long before um sending them out. So I want you to think about, how overwhelming that must have been for them that Jesus just decided like, you know, they they start following Jesus so that they can learn from him. And then all of a sudden, he sends them out on this missionary journey for them to go. And the gospel, I think of John, says that he tells them, you need to go out and preach to the lost sheep of Israel. So that's like Jewish people who have kind of, they're not devoted in their faith to the Lord, they're devoted to their religion. So that's what Jesus was telling the disciples to do, is go and preach my message to those people. And they all felt very inadequate. Like, oh my, like I just started following you to learn, your teachings, and now you're making me go out and teach other people. Like, I don't have the skill set to be able to do that. And then then they go out and he pairs them two by two. They go out and they preach his message, and they heal people, they heal the sick, they cast out demons, they do all these things that they've seen Jesus do, but they've never done themselves. And so they come back on this like mountaintop high. Like, they're like, guess what I did? Like, I don't know if any of y'all have like kids who come home from school that are like excited to tell you about their day. For me, that's Ina. She will give me every detail. Hugh Michael, I don't even know if he goes to school during the daytime, because I'll ask him, I'm like, who'd you see today? I don't know. What you ate today? I don't know. So yeah, but her, Lord, she'll come back and tell me all kind of stuff about her day. So excited. And that's what I think the disciples were like. They came back and they're telling Jesus, like, we healed the sick, we casted out demons. Like, think about it. They never had the power to do those things themselves. They had only ever seen Jesus do that before. So they're like, super excited, like really full of faith. I mean, imagine what they thought Jesus was. Like, he's like the best thing they had ever encountered, because he gave them the ability to do all these things that they've never been able to do before. Okay. So their faith in him had to have been the most that it had ever been, um, at the end of this missionary journey. Okay, so we're going to start today in verse 10 of chapter 9. It says, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. Wait, sorry. But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. So they're just kind of setting the scene. So the disciples come back. Jesus takes them to this town called Bethsaida. But like, I need you to see, it's kind of like the crowds, like the paparazzi, like they're following Jesus everywhere he was. And it was overwhelming to him, like he's trying to teach the disciples, and then this crowd comes around. And I mean, understand the crowd, like they're there for the fanfare, like they're around Jesus to see the miracles. And I guess they heard the message, but they were more in tuned with like what they could get out of it. Like, oh, can he heal me of this, whatever? Or, um, you know, is he gonna cast out this demon, or it was kind of like, think of like a circus, like, because that's kind of like what they were going to see, was like an act. Um, and I guess that, I mean, it had to have been frustrating to Jesus, but okay, so imagine the crowd was not just like a crowd of people in line to check out your groceries at Walmart. It ended up being 5,000 men, and that's not including women and children. So John MacArthur was theorizing that it was upwards of like 20 to 25,000 people. So, I mean, there's no way that you could heal every person and cast out every demon and minister to every, I mean, that's a lot of people. Um, so yeah, I would be overwhelmed. So props to Jesus. Lindsay said, like on the episode of The Chosen, the groups of people coming to see if he could do what he could actually do what was said. Right. So they were coming to see if it was true. Okay, so verse 12. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him, saying, send the crowds away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countrysides and find food and lodging, because we are in a remote place here. He replied, you give them something to eat. Then they answered, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Unless we go buy food for the crowd, unless we go and buy food for all of this crowd. And in parentheses, it says about 5,000 men were there. But he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. The disciples did so, and everybody sat down. Okay, I want to stop right there and just, so Luke is very like quick in his description of feeding the 5,000, but I'm going to give you some context from the other gospels. So we know that he gave that whenever they're, trying to figure out what, how are we going to feed these people, Jesus says in the other gospels, he says, go and see what food these people have available. And one of them finds a little boy, and the little boy has 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. And that was the only food that they could find. Think about that, among the entire crowd. So Ashley had made a point to me yesterday. She was like, imagine the people who were there who had food and just didn't want to share it. Like, it was a little boy who presented to the disciples these 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. But I'm sure among, 25,000 other people, that there was somebody who had something else that could have been given for the masses. Ashley said, I'm sure people had some snacks. I bring snacks. Um, but yeah, I want you to think about that. Like, is there, when it comes to like kingdom jobs, like, I'm going to say, think about your finances, or think about the groceries that are just in your pantry. We live this like day to day, like I go to work, I'm busy with all of my tasks that I do for the day. But are we really thinking about like kingdom purposes? Like if I tell you, I'm going to give you an example, like with Bless Your Heart, we'll find out about a very terrible situation, and we'll turn to our, we'll post it on Facebook, like, hey, we have a single mom who needs these things. And it warms my heart all the time. And I really believe that's a testament to the fact that we live in a Christian community, that there are so many people in our community who are willing to say, I have a bed, I have a car, I have a camper, I have they want to give of their resources to help other people. But y'all, think about the people in the crowd. They had to have other people who had food, but didn't want to share it for kingdom purposes. And so when we look at what God has provided for us, when we look at our checking account, our savings account, our food in our pantry, our clothes in our closet, when we start to understand that those resources or things that the Lord has allowed us to have, and when He has a purpose that we could be sharing those things or give of those things to other people, that we need to not be so guarded in not wanting to share. You know what I mean? Like, I understand that there's like a level of self-preservation. Like, I don't believe the Lord is calling me to empty out my complete savings account. But you know what? Sometimes when we see, a really bad situation, and I guess because we deal with Bless Your Heart like that, we see a lot of that more because people contact us. But I'm sure just in regular conversation among you and your coworkers or you and your friends, you hear of a terrible situation where $100 could make a drastic difference in the life of somebody else. Are you too guarded in the way that you're living your life that you have the extra $100, but you want it for your own selfish purposes and not to help somebody else? So I want us to just think about that. I'm not trying to say, you need to give all of your resources and deplete yourself and put yourself in a bind. Obviously, if that $100 is meant to help pay your mortgage, I'm not asking you to do that. But I think that, y'all, we have so much more than just the bare minimum. We really do. Even when we think that we don't, we really do. I have come to see how much $20 can substantially and profoundly impact the life of another person. Like, you don't realize how little bit it can take to really make an impact on somebody else. So, okay, get off my soapbox. But that's what I love, that Ashley pointed that out to me. There were people in the crowd who had food that didn't want to share it. And so think about that. God didn't multiply their food. How much more would God have multiplied their food to everybody? If He can do it to 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. So I think that's important to note. Um, So Jesus tells them, go make them sit down in groups of 50. And in the other gospels, one of the disciples says, it would have taken 200 denarii for us to feed all these people, which is like just a ridiculous amount of money back then. Like, that would have been more than a year's wages, okay, to feed all of these people. Um, in verse 16, oh, well, Jesus tells them to put them in groups of 50. It says the disciples did so and everyone sat down. So verse 16, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looking up to heaven, He gave thanks and broke them. Then He gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people, and they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. So y'all, I want you to see that the disciples' initial response to Jesus was that the people needed to rely on themselves for provision. Like, they said, Jesus, we need to dismiss the people so that they can go find their own food. And Jesus is saying, no, like, you feed them. And they're like, we don't have anything, and, one of them says, unless I go and we go buy some. We know that the other disciple was not trusting and says, we don't even have enough money to do that. That would take 200 denarii. So they come off the missionary journey where they're on this like mountaintop, right? And then now they're posed with a problem and they're again questioning Christ's ability to make a provision for these people. We see in the Old Testament, and I always say one day we'll get there, y'all, but one day we will. In the Old Testament, when Moses freed the Jews from Egypt, we know that they wandered in the desert for 40 years, okay? And you would imagine that the desert would be a very desolate place with not a lot to eat, which was true. So God provided the Egyptians manna in the desert, which was like, it was like bread so they would wake up in the morning and there would be manna on the ground every morning, but they wouldn't have it on Sundays, but they would have twice as much on Saturdays. And they would go and pick up the manna and they would eat it. And that was what their provision was. So God provided for the Jews when they were in the desert. He provided them food. And so that was, I mean, just think they would have never survived the 40 years if it wasn't for God providing them food, because we all know that there's not much to eat in the desert, especially for that many people. So the disciples knew God had the ability to make a provision of food. But I guess y'all see you, Michael, right there. I didn't even realize you could see him. Um, I guess in their brains, they didn't like equate wandering in the desert to what these people coming find them in this, Jesus in this desolate place. But in so many reasons, I want y'all to draw that parallel that the Jews were wandering in the desert and they didn't make it to the promised land because they weren't obeying God. Okay. But all of these people from these towns, they were all Jewish and they all were wandering in the desert, not like physically wandering the desert, but they were not like they were missing the point of their religion. They were allowing all their religious rules to be more important than honoring God, and they weren't doing the things that the Lord wanted them to do. So in their spiritual lives, they were wandering in the desert. Okay. And so we see it's supposed to be really a big sign of God's mercy on us, that despite the fact that we are severely disobedient and don't pay attention to the things that he thinks are important, and despite the fact that he shows us literally in our faces every single day the sacrifice he's willing to make for us, that we stray away. Despite all of those things, he still loves us and he still provides for us, just like he did for the Jews in the desert. I mean, if I was God and the Jews were in the desert, I would have been like, I literally just saved you from the Pharaoh and in slavery. Like, I parted the Red Sea. What part of this did you not understand? How can you be so stupid? Right? That would be but that's not what God did. God was unbelievably patient with them and still made provision for them in the desert. And so that is what happens here with the feeding of the 5,000, is that despite the fact that the people came for fanfare, they came to see a circus, they came to see Jesus perform miracles, not to hear his message, not to realize that he was the Son of the living God. They came for all the wrong reasons. God still made provision for them. And so I want you to see that parallel and just see that that is the merciful, graceful, forgiving God that we serve. Like, that is how many times he's willing to forgive us, despite the fact that we disappoint him on a daily basis, So, um, and y'all, that's how we should be to other people. And so if we feel like, we're in a friendship or relationship or, um, a family relationship, that we have gone out of our way to do nice things for them again, again, and again, and they still don't listen to what you tell them to do. They alienate themselves. They think they're better than you. They betray you. They do whatever, fill in the blank. We need to be Jesus to them, because that's how God is to us, our disobedient, gossiping, sinful selves. Like, that's how we are. And God extends us grace and gives us mercy and gives us forgiveness even when we don't deserve it. And so that's how we should be in the relationships with the people around us. So I want you to see that this miracle was big. This is like kind of a culmination of his ministry, that he was able to, make a provision for this many people. And Pastor Matt, when he preaches about this, always says that, the way the disciples went out and fed each of the groups was that they had these baskets. The other gospels say that they were, well, they have these baskets. They have to keep coming back to Jesus to fill the basket, and then they go back out and feed the people again. And that's supposed to be a sign of that we have to come to Jesus for sustenance. Our provision comes from him. Again, we see the number 12 in verse 17. All the people, 25,000 people, ate and were satisfied. Okay, so that, like, they were full. And when they picked up the remainder, they had 12 basketfuls, and that's supposed to be a sign of completeness. Like Ashley said, on a clock, 12 hours is like the whole round of the clock. So God makes provision not just for what is in front of him, but he will like multiply it to be more than what you need. And so I just want you to think about that. Like when the disciples' baskets were empty from feeding the people, they went back to Jesus and he filled it up again. And so if you feel like your basket is empty, you need to do what Ashley described yesterday and be in communication with him and be in his presence and spend time in prayer. And y'all, I feel like we have this internal yearning to not be in prayer. Like, not settle our mind for just a second to be able to be talking to him. It's like we afraid of what that quietness, I don't know, at least I am. But it takes some time and discipline for you to be in prayer like that. What I think is important is we need to try to for me, sometimes it's me praying out loud. If I'm praying in my head, I'm like off track. Okay. And so like my brain goes a bunch of different places. But if I'm praying out loud, I have to focus on the words that I'm saying. So it's like I kind of feel like my brain stays in it better. But y'all, we need to be in communication with him, because that's the way that we fill up our baskets again. Ashley said journaling and prayer is really good for that. I agree. In 2021, I went through something like really difficult before the hurricane. And that is what I did. I had a prayer journal and I read through them sometimes. It's somewhere around here. And I used to write and write and write. And it helped me so much because it was like once I wrote it down, it was like out of my brain. So I would encourage you to do that if you feel like you struggle with focusing in prayer. So one more little section and then we'll finish for today. Verse 18, the title in the Bible that I'm reading, which I think is NIV. Yeah, NIV. The title of it is Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. So verse 18, once when Jesus was praying in private, his disciples were with him and he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and still others, the one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers, "God's Messiah." I want you to see that it's um it's important that Jesus is, number one, who's he talking to? He's talking to his disciples. So those are the people who are with him all the time. They know the most of his ministry because they see all of it. The crowds would have only seen what they were present for, right? So Jesus is trying to draw this distinction between them, is that when you're with me all the time, you get to really see who I am, which who can attest to that you can love somebody, love your boyfriend, but until you get married and you live with them, like you don't know nobody. That's what I got to say. You don't know that old boy leaves all his dirty clothes upstairs when you think that you finished all of your laundry, and then he comes with a pile of dirty clothes. You don't know people until you're with them all the time. And that is what, that's not exactly what Jesus is saying, but he's saying, what do the crowd say that I am? They only see me temporarily. And the disciples say, well, say that you're John the Baptist, who we know was his forerunner, and he was preaching a message of repentance in the wilderness. So, but clearly, Jesus is not John the Baptist. He's the person that John the Baptist was pointing to, which is exactly what John the Baptist says to his own disciples. He says, um, you know, it's less of me, more of Jesus. My disciples need to not follow me anymore. They need to go follow Jesus. So we know that he's not John the Baptist, but to onlookers, people think that, oh, well, now John's in jail, so this guy Jesus is around to further his ministry. Then others thought that he was Elijah. Elijah was an Old Testament prophet, and Ashley, you may chime in a little bit because I'm going to tell you what I know about Elijah. He was an Old Testament prophet who was like a very legit guy, and God loved him very much. He is the only person in the Bible other than Jesus who did not die. Elijah was taken up into heaven, like when at the end of his life. He didn't die. He like ascended into heaven on a cloud. And he was like known to be a very important prophet from the Old Testament. So every time the people of Israel would stray away, God would send a prophet to come and help them get back where they needed to be. And Elijah was one of those people. But he was like think of like, he's like the level of Moses, like he's a very important person in the Old Testament that God would have sent to send messages to his people. Um, Ashley, anything on Elijah if you're with us? No. Um, he was warning people about worshiping Baal and Jezebel. So again, the Jewish people are like not on point as they should be, and God sends him to kind of fuss the people and tell them like where they should be. So clearly we see Jesus is not Elijah. Elijah points to a coming Messiah as well. And then they also say he's one of the prophets from long ago. So one of the many other prophets that God had sent in the Old Testament to save the people. There were many of them, like we see Moses, Elijah, not Jonah. Jonah, Isaiah, Ezekiel. Like there were many that God had given them a divine message to go and help the Old Testament Jews get back to what God was telling them. Ashley said he was sent to encourage the people to return to the Lord. I just think it's so neat that he got taken straight to heaven. I want to know why when we get there. Yeah, same. I want to know that too. So, okay, back to where we are. Jesus is talking to all of the disciples, asking them, who did the crowd say that I am? John the Baptist, Elijah, Old Testament prophet. But Jesus says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter, who's kind of like the mouthpiece of the disciples, he says, God's Messiah. So I want you to see that the disciples, after every miracle, after every message, every time that Jesus preached, they believed in Jesus as much as they could at that time. Okay. And even then, we see that they waver in their faith sometimes whenever their circumstances get scary. We see that after feeding the 5,000, when, Jesus asks Peter to get out the boat and Jesus is walking on water, Peter turns and starts to look at the waves and the wind and all the different things, and he sinks. So he loses sight of Christ and he starts to waver in his faith. We see that whenever, Peter's approach with actually being killed because Jesus is arrested, that he denies Christ 3 times. So Peter, the one who's telling Jesus right now, you are God's Messiah, he also eventually wavers in his faith. And so it's just important for us to see, like, who do we say that God is? Like, who do we say Jesus is? And, the Bible says that salvation is imparted to us through faith alone. It's not through works so that no man can boast. And so the answer to that question is infinitely important. Okay. So who do we say Jesus is in our lives? And we weren't Old Testament Jews, so for us to say, oh, he's Elijah, like, is not really as profound. But what I want you to think is Jesus just a person we turn to whenever we're in trouble? Like, because that's not God's Messiah. Okay. Is Jesus a person that we turn to um when our marriage is in trouble, or when we don't have a lot of money in our bank account, or when we're facing a surgery, or when one of our loved ones is diagnosed with cancer, or when we only turn to him when our children are sick, or when we're estranged from our family. Like, we need to not be like the crowd, y'all. Like, we need to be like post-resurrection Peter. That's who we need to be. We need to be people who really acknowledge Jesus to be God's Messiah, that we love him and devote our lives to him, and that we turn over every single thing that we have, and we turn our pride and our personality and everything that we have, that we just put at his feet and just say, Lord, make me into who you want me to be. I want to be who you want me to be. And I want to serve you all the days of my life, because I'm so infinitely thankful for the salvation that you've imparted to me on the cross, even when I didn't deserve it. So, I mean, Jesus needs to be the Messiah on the mountaintop, and he needs to be the Messiah in the valley. And y'all, I guess what I'm trying to say is our circumstances and our wind and our waves and all the things cannot impact our relationship with Christ. Like, that needs to be constant. Okay. Because then, y'all, all those external factors won't matter as much anymore, because we're going to be focused on the one true living God who overcame the world. And there is nothing that he cannot accomplish. And his plans for us are perfect. And so, even though our life may not look like what we thought, like, no one got married and said, yep, my spouse is going to cheat on me. Can't wait for that to happen. Or no one said, I had these children and a husband, and now my house is in foreclosure. That's great. No one planned that out. Okay. But you know what? Sometimes things happen. And I'm not saying, um, I'm not saying that it's your fault. I'm not addressing those things. What I'm saying is sometimes those things do happen. And Jesus is with us through those times, just like he's with us when we win the Crescent City Classic, or we get a promotion at work, or, so he's with us all the time. And so I don't want you, if you're in a situation in your life right now that you feel abandoned, like you feel alone, like nobody else understands. Like, I need you to know, like, Jesus understands. Like, he loved you so much that he literally put flesh on his soul and came to earth and experienced all of the hardships of this worldly life for us. And there's nothing that he didn't encounter. And he willingly walked and crucified himself so that you and I can be in the presence of a holy God and spend eternity with him and have victory in him. And that alone just humbles me, and gets me just in this place of like, Lord, all of what I have is yours. It's not mine. And let me just do with it what you want me to do, regardless of my circumstances or my plans. Like, let it not be my plans. So I want that to encourage you today. We need to ask that question. We need to answer that question that Jesus asked to the disciples. Like, who do you say that I am? And so, y'all, I want you to think today, who do you say that he is? Is he Is he just a part of your life, or is he, the focus of all the things that we do, all the things that we say, every personal interaction that we have? Is that, is Jesus having influence on all of those things? Because y'all, for us to truly say that he's our savior, he is going to infiltrate every piece of our heart and our brains. So I want you to practice that today if we can. All righty, y'all. Well, I'll get off my soapbox. I don't know if y'all can tell, I did have caffeine today. Praise God. Tomorrow we will start with Jesus predicting his death, and transfiguration. Apparently this week's just going to be a whole week of chapter 9, but you know what? That'll be okay. So if you're just watching the recording, have a good Wednesday, and we'll see you tomorrow.